these are the administrators of the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society online. And they've been doing some great works. But to get the conversation started, I'll just have these gentlemen introduce themselves and give just a little snapshot of, their background and so on. Maybe which part of Grenada they're really connected to and all of that. So let's start with, who's going to lead it off? Mr. Lewis?
Steve.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Steve Lewis. I was born in the UK, which is where I'm calling from right now. My parents were both from St. John. So my mum was from Concord, my dad from Gwarf. I feel very much connected to the island. I visit Grenada maybe once every 2 or 3 years, I feel very much at home when I'm there.
Essentially, that's what you call him, Kitty Boy said in the song. It always feels like home, even if you were not actually born there, but because that roots is in you. My friend who did the book, The Energy of God, he speaks about that energy that flows in the bloodstreams, in the DNA of the Gulf people. So once your father comes from Gulf, or you have a parent that come from Gulf, the genes are in you.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Martin.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Tell us a little about you.
Yeah, I guess I was born and grew up in St. George's. I guess my father is from Montmars. My mom's from St. David's. I spent the time that before I migrated to the US, I lived in St. George's. Lived on Williamson Road, just above Grenville Street. Went to Palmer School, then went to PBC. Currently, I live in Saba, a little island in the Dutch Caribbean. I'm a historian, an archivist. I write about Grenada's history and culture. I've written a few books on Grenada and love in discussing Grenada history and culture.
Okay, wonderful. So you can see we have people here that are well equipped for the undertaking that they have gotten themselves into with the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society online. Speaking of that entity, can you define for us, can any of you or both of you can share it, what exactly is the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society online?
I think the fittest person to talk about that, we three are administrators, would actually be Phil, who would be joining us shortly, because he was the one that set the website or the Facebook page up. And it was really set up as a vehicle, as a forum for us to share our collective history, and also to generate a bit of awareness of the state of our national archives. It's a shame that today we can't go to a place in Grenada and just look at our history. Nothing really seems to be preserved in the way which you'd see it preserved in other countries.
Okay.
As a part of this, there's a big interest of people looking for their own family histories. And so we facilitate a lot of discussion around that. And then there's a lot of sharing that goes on amongst our group. I think now we have a total membership of just over 1,200 people. And we launched the site about a year ago.
Okay. Okay.
I just got a message from Philip saying he's trying to get in.
Okay, Brother John.
Oh. All right, he's in.
So when this was set up, I mean, you said that that Philip is the one who would have done all of the website and so on. But ultimately, there must have been some meeting of minds. And so, because I don't think, or should I ask, Did he just go about and do that? How did the concept develop? And what was the driving force that led to the development of this thing?
Well, I think I remember about this time last year. It was early January. I was just chatting to Phil online. Didn't know him beforehand. It's just something we had in common. We met each other online and we were just chatting about Grenada. Mm-hmm. I think this is something that Phil had in his mind for quite some time. Okay. And it was painfully obvious whilst we were talking to each other that when you're looking for information about Grenada, you're having to look all over the place for sources of information. And it's hard work. It's very, very difficult. So he had the idea of setting this up as a Facebook page. I joined very quickly on as an administrator, as did Angus. And I think because we managed to grow the membership as quickly as we have, clearly a lot of people were of like minds and getting benefit in sharing this information.
Okay. Mr. Thorne, are you with us? You're not in yet? Are you hearing us?
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there you are. Okay, so you have arrived. Good afternoon, Mr. Thorne.
Connecting to audio.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Okay, right. We got you. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Thorne. Good afternoon. Welcome to the comfort zone.
Thank you for having me. Sorry I'm late. Had some technical difficulties.
Well, tell you the truth, it seemed like this afternoon has been an afternoon of technical difficulties. We've had our own share of it early on,
I understand.
Yes, so can you just, we've introduced Steve and we've introduced Angus, so can you just tell us who is Philip Thorne? Where is Philip Thorne from? What does, Philip Thorne do? What does he bring to the table in relation to the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society online?
All right, so as you mentioned, my name is Philip Thorne. I was born in the U.S., in the city of Philadelphia. My parents are from Grenada, from Guelph, St. John's. My mother's side. Yes, the Duncan family from Guelph.
The Duncans?
Yes, that's my family.
Oh yeah, Vaughn and Duncan and them, and Tony Duncan and so.
Yes.
Grace
Duncan.
Yeah. Mr. V and Mr. Tony with the sawmill and stuff like that.
Yes. That was my grandfather.
Yeah, great.
And then on the Thorne side, from Carriacou via St. Andrews.
Okay.
So Joshua Thorne. I'm sure you know.
I remember that name, yes, very well. Yeah.
That was my uncle, my dad's brother. So my interest in this whole thing, in 2007, I was in Grenada, wanted to get my Grenadian citizenship, and the lady behind the counter says, "What is your father's mother's maiden name?" I was like, I have no idea. So that started a whole series of events which led to me researching my ancestry in Grenada and moving forward in time, realizing that there were all these records related to Grenada that were just scattered all over the globe in various different places. And I was very interested in trying to save the archives in Grenada, in town. When I visited the archives in 2007, there was a hole in the ceiling that was there from Hurricane Ivan. And I came back to the States and I said, I have to make an effort to do something. Started writing people, connecting with different people, and things did start to happen. And then it just died again. So when I found out in 2019, I believe it was 2019, that Grenada had gotten this grant for some $5 million to work on saving the archives, I was like, okay, that's great. How can I participate in this and further my research to help others to further their research, connecting with people like Angus and Steve. We created this thing, the online society, through Facebook, which has over 1,000 members now. Our videos have been viewed thousands of times. And that's really it. I mean, I started the Facebook group purely to get people interested so that we could save the archives, and along the way, help people learn about their genealogy in relationship to Grenada, Carriacou, and Penny Martinique. And that's it in a nutshell.
Well, tell you the truth, it's really interesting and it's very telling, as I was mentioning earlier on to Steve, you know, and to Angus. You know, even for those who were not actually born in Grenada, once that, you know, it's part of your DNA, and you cannot lose that connectivity. And there you have it. While so many of us here appears to be so indifferent, you know, towards these records and towards that kind of information, there you have it, people like you who are not actually born here have that kind of appreciation, to be able to be putting that kind of energy and that kind of expertise into maintaining our history and our archives, you know, and I really do commend you gentlemen for that, you know, because the whole, you mentioned about coming here and being asked what's your mother's maiden surname and your father's maiden surname and so. And you know that's a challenge that many of us have faced, because some of us went to school using a particular name, and then when it's time for us, when we need some official documentation because of some transaction, or we have to travel, whatever, that's when we get to realize that the name that we've been carrying is not our officially recorded name at all, you know? And you get to realize that the name that you know your mother by is not what's officially in the records. You know,
I can definitely identify with that.
You could identify with that.
Yes.
You know?
In I think it was 2016, I was in Grenada, went to the Catholic Church, in St. John's in Wall, and I'm asking for my mother's birth certificate. So the lady,
baptismal certificate.
Yes, sorry, baptismal. And the lady gives me the thing, and my mother's middle name and first name are reversed. So I said, you know, why is that? She said, well, as a child, she didn't like Joanna. Kids used to make fun of Joanna in school. So she changed her name from Joanna Barbara Duncan to Barbara Joanna Duncan. And I asked, you know, the lady, I said, are you sure, is this information correct? And my mom was there with me, and she said, yes, that's correct. And I changed it, and so all my life, I've been known as Barbara Joanna, because she changed her name on her own. There's no official change that was done, but even going to Canada, that just became her name. Barbara became her first name instead of her middle name. Same thing with my dad. I have a box of records on the floor next to me that I'm looking at, and you know, he had to have his brother in Carriacou write letters stating what his proper name was, when he was born, because there is no birth certificate for my father. You know, so yeah, these things happen.
You know, I had an experience with that first name. I'm speaking about a personal experience. His first name and middle name. Because all my life I've been Raphael Paul. I know I have that other name, but it's never been used really.
Okay.
And my first passport was made out that way, Raphael Paul. You know?
Right.
The other initial is there, but it wasn't until sometime afterwards when I had to renew my passport and I went to get a new birth certificate. I was informed that what is passing for my middle name is actually my official first name, which is Theophilus. Yeah.
And then, like you said, the home names, that's a whole other thing. You know, like my brother, for example. I mean, we both were taken to Grenada probably around the age of 1. I was junior, so it was junior. But my brother's name is Anthony. but everybody called him Pookie Boy. And the reason for that is that the man who was taking care of him in Grenada, whenever he would go to the beach, the man's name was Pookie. So that became Pookie Boy for my brother. So, but who would ever figure out, you know, these home names like Mouth Organ, Mitchell is one of my cousins. Mouth Organ, like who, you know, I don't even know his real name.
And I can tell you that this is very common here, you know, that someone might come from overseas or from wherever, so they come looking for somebody by their duly registered name, and nobody knows who that person is, because they've known that person for all their lives by another name, you know, and some people do it deliberately also. They don't want people to know what their official name is. And some would say, if the police come looking for me, you know, I don't want the police.
Right.
My dad used to tell me a story of twins he knew in Guelph at the time. No one can tell them apart. They're identical twins, but they're both known as "Nami, my brother," because that's what they always used to say.
Okay. Yes. I'm telling you, that is serious. So, as administrators of the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society Online, do you have any particular responsibilities in relation to that entity, or how does it work?
Any responsibilities?
I guess in a sense we do whatever our skills and talents might be. I guess, you know, I think we chime in wherever we can. We do different things as necessary. Somebody asks a question, we respond. Like I think Philip generally deals with who becomes a member. Even though we both have the authority to approve or disapprove people, but Philip generally does that. I used to do it at times, but then I was like, you know, let's one person do it because they have a better handle on it, kind of thing, you know. So I think, but in general, I think we all chime in. Actually, it took me a while before I realized I was an administrator as well, you know. So, but I think we all contribute wherever, you know. If somebody comes up with a history question, I definitely might chime in, you know. We always try to put up things, Philip, on a regular basis. We'll try to put up things that he finds in newspapers and things like that that might interest other people. So yeah, so it depends on you know, what you happen to be stumble into or whatever that you find that people might find it about you.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say also that we try very much to keep the focus as pure as we can on Grenada history and the genealogy, trying to do as much as possible. But when you have a captive audience of 1,000 or more people, and we have Grenada in common, it's very tempting for people to put other things that are of interest to people, like the COVID situation, other things, current events, very interesting. But if we keep those on the site, then we're going to lose what we're trying to generate in terms of this hub of the history, the genealogy. So to answer your question, as part of that responsibility is trying to, if you like, police the site so that we can keep it as pure as we can and keep the focus. So then we generate the interest for the people that are coming onto the site.
Oh yes, I had that experience myself, and I appreciate that. Yes, you mentioned that people may request information in terms of tracing the family line and so. What's the process involved? Where do you go to get that kind of information?
Okay, I'll take a crack at that one. Because often I'm contacted asking for family information. And I can certainly say when I started, I didn't know where to begin either. Only thing I knew was my parents' name and the names of my mother's parents, my grandparents. That was it. I didn't realize that something existed called Family Search, which has photographed countless invaluable, priceless Grenada documents from the registry, birth and death registries, land registries, indentures. So this information exists. However, with COVID-19, there's no way to access a family history center. There isn't one in Grenada, so anybody in Grenada, they would just be out of luck. But learning about that information, oddly enough, from somebody all the way in Australia who had Grenadian roots, had told me about Family Search and what the Latter-day Saints had done. So that was a starting point for me. Actually going and looking at microfilm. At that point in time, it was not digitized. You had to sit there with the old school, thing, going backwards and forwards, and you only had a couple hours of time because they don't open on a regular basis. It's all volunteer. But anyway, fast forward to 20th century, 2020, the internet. Google Books is an invaluable resource in terms of finding digitized material related to Grenada in particular, as well as to the wider West Indies, Caribbean. Just invaluable, like I said. And there are people who have actually created their own websites for their family history. Okay. And a lot of times, what you'll find is that you might have somebody I'll just use an example of my own self. Macintosh. I don't know too much about the Macintosh family, but there are other people who have done research on the Macintosh family, and they might have the name of a cousin or uncle or aunt, and therefore I'm then able to make some connections. I'll contact that person online. Of course, Ancestry.com is a vehicle that many people use. A lot of information on there. And Ellis Island Records for people coming to the United States is an invaluable resource. I found countless cousins, in-laws, relatives passing through Ellis Island coming to New York. And often it will tell you where they're coming from in terms of they might have been living with their mother or an uncle or father. And that information then again helps you to build out the tree and helps you to work with the information you have. For me personally, the most valuable resource is undoubtedly the Registry of Records. Because when you get to somebody's will, if they own land and they had children, that is just like, finding a diamond in the earth, walking outside and digging it up. Because it'll tell you who the children are. A lot of times they'll say they bought land through an indenture from their uncle. And the number will be listed there. Record book R7, page 560. And then you go look for that record. And it's just a continual hunt. It's an investigation. And that pretty much sums up how it's done. It's doing real research. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't know how to do any kind of research. They don't know that you can use quotation marks and a plus sign and link different search terms together and get to specifically what you're looking for. Like if I search in quotation the name Sylvester and Carriacou, I will get information that I'm looking for.
Okay.
I'm echoing, so.
Yeah, I think unlike Stephen and Philip, I am more of a historian than I am a genealogist. I have done my genealogy and things like that, but I stopped at one point and basically started doing history. So I think a lot of the things that I encounter, like, when people asking about certain names, and my stuff especially if it's old. The older it is, the better, for me, because I do a lot of the French and early British, so, whereas when you get up to the 21st century, the 20th century, I'm a little, because I'm not too familiar with the names and stuff, but still, if they had property and stuff, it's easy to get stuff on it. So I think for me, in that sense, I actually would rely on other genealogists for historical information sometimes. Because genealogists do such detailed stuff. They pull out stuff on families that you're like, wow, and it helps my historical analysis.
Okay. Brother John, just a minute. Brother John, do you have the online stream volume on the pad? Because we're getting an echo.
How is it now?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Right. You mentioned a while ago, Philip, you mentioned the registry.
Yes.
You're speaking about Grenada's registry of records.
Yes, that is correct.
And so how do you get access to that? Because I know that a digital process had been started, but it's been discontinued. And up to just recently, there was some conversations taking place about the state that it's in and the need for a new home for our registry because of the challenges of deterioration, and that we essentially are going to lose some of these documents and so on. How concerned are you that this, in essence, can impact, us being able to access that kind of information going forward?
It is heartbreaking. That is all that I can say. It's just devastating to Grenada's history. It's devastating to all the people in diaspora who want to know about their history and just history in general. That was one of the things. When I started doing this research, what I found out is that there are countless documents, books, records all over the place. In New York City, where I lived at the time, I could go to the New York Public Library and get access to records that aren't even available in Grenada, and that's a problem. These are public records. These aren't privately held records like the records of a plantation owner, for example, during the period of slavery. These are tax records that are just sitting there. So getting back to your question, Grenada has a wealth of information. It has, and it's just sitting there rotting through time, through weather conditions, through termites, through mishandling. I was asked, when I was there at the archives the last time before it closed to the public, I was asked, next time I come to Grenada, can I please bring latex gloves? Because they don't even have gloves to handle these documents, because the oils from our fingers actually further help to deteriorate these documents. But as far as the registry of records, what I'm talking about specifically are books in which transactions are recorded. Wills, buying property, freeing of, actually Angus asked me about this a couple of days ago. There are indentures where enslaved people were freed. Some of my ancestors were actually freed through indenture or through will. So those are the kinds of things you will find in the Grenada Registry of Records. A lot of that stuff was microfilmed by the Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. And as I was saying, the only way to access that is on site. With COVID-19, you can't get into a family history center to actually look at those digitized records. From what I understand, a set of films was delivered to Grenada and then just vanished into thin air, and then a digital copy on a hard drive was delivered to Grenada. Where it is, I have no clue. But something like that needs to be set up in Grenada, where people in Grenada can actually go and sit down at a computer and access those records, whether it's in a library, some space that's set aside as a makeshift archive. Something needs to change on the ground in Grenada. You're there, and hopefully you can take our message to the Ministry of Education to just put it out there. And they could hate me if they want. They're the ones in charge of the National Archives. And somebody needs to light a fire under their behind.
I should mention that the library and archives being part of the public library has been shut down since 2011.
Yes.
And it had to do with the condition of the building.
That it was.
I think the workers had protested the condition, the bad state of the building, which may have had to do with the earlier fire that was next door, which they may have had to wet the other building, and it ended up with termites in the building and other kind of maybe mold and things like that. So that's why that building was shut down. What Philip is talking about, the big hole in the archives, was the big, basically this massive window that fell in, I think probably alive and has never been put back up. And because it's never really caused the problem, it's just been left there, even though the archives is open to the elements in a way. You know, so I think I haven't been in there in a while, but I've been in there a few years ago, and it's just shut down in a sense. I don't know. I know some documents were removed to be digitized some years ago, probably about 15, 16, newspapers and stuff. And the thing is, the condition of these documents are such that the minute you open them, they fall apart.
They start to fall apart.
Right, because so you really shouldn't be allowing anybody to go there unless it is to digitize those documents or to try to preserve them. So nobody should be using these documents at all because they're in such fragile condition. The same with the documents at the registrar's office. These are books that go back to the 1700s. You know, the late 1700s, from 1763. Basically, these are the books that people still handle today. It's really hard to search them because the index to all of those volumes they are in tatters, because they're used a lot by lawyers. So the law firms send people to search them. I think they don't charge enough money. Charging people 50 cents a search, they should charge them more because these lawyers make lots of money from doing this. And they should take that money and go into the preservation of these documents. You know, the digitization, and nowadays a big digitization project to digitize government documents, and this is a World Bank project. It's a few $1 million, I think, the one Philip had alluded to. So maybe something will come out of that. I don't know how far back they're going to go and digitize, you know, but once these documents are gone, they're gone. That's it. You know, I think luckily for us, the LDS or the Mormons have actually copied the early documents. So we have since lost documents that they copied. The same thing for our births and deaths. They copied the index and everything. So luckily for us, it is on microfilm or digitized. The microfilm has been digitized by the LDS. So at least we have that option at some point. But we have since lost those documents in Grenada. Because, as a friend said, I have a good friend in Grenada that says that Grenada has outsourced the preservation of its heritage to anybody who happen to have documents. And it's not, and we don't seem to care to want to bring these documents in one place that preserves. We talk about history and culture, but how can you preserve your history and culture or teach your history and culture if you don't have it in a place in your island? You know, we make stories up, and that's a problem with that, is that people will make stories up when they can't find documents to support things. You know, a case in point is the monument at Leapers Hill. You know, the data in there is incorrect. You know, and granted, at the time, the people may not have known that, but had they gone to do the research, they would have known that. You know, so there are these kind of things that we need to be aware of, that if we had an archives, you can go do the research. But without an archives, without any place, without even a library, a public library, you're left to your own devices. And hey, a good story always works really nice. You know, so I think we need to, and I know there have been, I think I've heard government officials often say, we don't need that library that you guys talk about where you pack it with books. We're digitizing and we're doing all that stuff. You know, and that's a comment that you hear. But I'm like, we don't have anything, so it doesn't matter what you might want to dream of, but we don't even have the basics. You know, and we never get rid of books because a lot of these books are not digitized. They're all copies of things. you know, and some of them are specific to Grenada because they were only produced in Grenada, and they exist few other places, if anything. So when it's lost in Grenada, it's gone, and that is the sad truth about it.
Just to add to that, just to add to what Agnes is saying, the Antiquarian Society in Boston, Massachusetts, they visited Grenada in the early 1900s, and they actually published in their own publication in Boston the sad state of things in Grenada. And they said that it doesn't appear that anybody in Grenada is interested in Grenada's history. So that is very telling in and of itself. I even know when I was doing my research, my parents were like, "Oh, that's a waste of time. You know, why are you doing this? Nobody cares." So that is just a Grenada mentality.
It's a mindset. I mentioned it earlier on. How many of our people who are born here, we're just indifferent to that kind of thing, right? But you have people that's not necessarily born here, or even people who would have left here and lived many years overseas, but they have that appreciation for our history and for our contribution to human civilization generally. Because many people leave Grenada and travel to England, to Canada, to the US, and become very much involved in the society out there and make significant contributions to human growth and development in general. You know, so I think we need to have a greater appreciation for that, and that makes me appreciate even more the kind of work that you guys are doing. Mr. Lewis, have you been in England? I know there's great store of our archives and so in England and in France. Have you been able to access any information, you know, that's been of significance to Grenada and to the work that the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society undertakes?
Yeah, absolutely. Before the site was launched, so kind of like pre-COVID days now, I used to go to the National Archives at Kew in London, and that's a massive resource of information, and I pulled out a lot of information from there. What I've found in more recent times is that we actually do have a Latter-day Saints centre within a 10-minute walk away where I live, which is fantastic. So I pulled out quite a lot of records from that whilst it was open. We're in COVID days, so I'm waiting for that to reopen. I had a bit of a head start to my research. And what started my research actually was when my father passed in 2007. He never spoke much about anything beyond his parents, really. But I noticed that there was a file of information that he'd never spoken about before, and I'd never seen before. And I was amazed to see this chest of information was packed full of papers dating back to 1838. And it basically was a chronicle of the family, I guess, because there were wills, there were land transactions, there were baptismal records of people I'd never heard of before in my life. And that's what got me thinking, who are these people? How can I find out more about it? And so I did all the sort of things that Phil mentioned at the start, looking at manuscripts and going to Kew, for example, the National Archives, just trying and talking to elders, trying to find out as much information as possible. I still am actually, although it's not very active. There's something called GenWeb, World GenWeb, and I'm the editor for Grenada on that. And what that professes to do is something similar to what our site does, really. It has a messaging centre, and it's a resource for anyone who's looking for Grenada's history. It's not very well promoted, and so not many people look at it. And I've lost interest in it anyway, because we have something that I think is far better reaching with our Facebook site.
Something that Steve didn't mention is that it's a contributor to the British slave, what is it called?
Oh, so this was an interesting thing. Again, it's just something I fell into.
Steve, you've been holding out on us?
Not really. No. But what I found was that the University College of London have set up a website that they call Legacies of British Slaveholders. And so what they've done, they've taken the 45 or 46,000 British slaveholders, and they're trying to build a database of all of these people. They have a database, in fact. They're trying to populate that database with as much information about them. So that includes things like their date of birth, their date of death, what they owned. Essentially, all these 46,000 people all claimed compensation, which is why we have a record of their names. So what the site is trying to do is populate this with as much information like biographies. And I fell upon this, and I looked at the Grenadian people who would, guess the planters and the slave owners who claimed compensation. There are 993 of them, and there's very, very little information about them. On the LBS site, it's mainly Bayesian or Jamaican slaveholders, not so much from Grenada, because I guess in relative terms there's very little information about them. And so I thought, well, let me take a look to see what I can find myself. And what I found was not really doing too much work, just online, just Googling the names and looking at Google Books, for example, and just looking at other sources. I'm finding information that I guess the UCL, because they only just started up this resource in recent times, they haven't got round to doing just yet. And in fact, they're calling upon the wider community to help them to build up this database. So I find myself, in fact, I did it just recently, just last week actually, writing information and sending it across to them. They'll take the information, they'll verify it, they'll do more research, and then they'll build an entry. And for anyone who contributes, they'll write a, thank you for your contribution. So I've been doing this on quite a regular basis. And it would be great, wouldn't it, if we managed to completely populate that, because it gives us all an insight as to our ancestral beginnings, I guess.
Yeah. Most of the local Grenadians on that site have not been filled in. There is no information on lots of the local people. Yeah. Mostly, it's a lot of the British people who had owned enslaved people in Grenada, but all of the local Grenadians, there's really no information on them.
Okay.
Which brings us back to archives and records again,
yes.
Isn't it? Because if it was there, it's so easy. I'll tell you something else, Raphael. Something I did quite recently was I've been now writing my family tree for the last 13 years, and I've got a massive family tree that I host privately on Ancestry, and I started to research the cousins of my cousins, because such is the nature of our families, is that you find a cousin over here might relate to this one over here, and it's all part of my extended family. But I was talking to a cousin of mine, and we have obviously a shared history, so I shared our family history with her, and her daughter was very interested in the research. Now, her daughter's father is English, so I gave her Grenadian family, and she was glad to get all these records that went back to 1797, which is the furthest back I've got back with my family line. So she's very glad to see that. And she said, well, it'd be quite nice to get something on my dad's side. And I thought, okay. I was up quite late one night, quite often I am actually. I thought, well, what can I find online about her dad's side? I think I spent about 2 hours, and I got down to like 15, 20, because all the information's there. It's just easy picking. And with ours, we struggle really hard because we don't have the records. That there is no archive. That there's nothing there for us to access as easily as that. And so I was glad for her, but also frustrated personally, because there's so much more about my family that I wanted to learn, and still I'm trying to find out years later.
Okay. Well, to tell you the truth, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it just dawned on me, because I was going to have this conversation, I began thinking about my own situation. And it just dawned on me that my grandmother on my father's side, I couldn't tell anybody exactly what her correct name was, because I grew up calling her Nem, or Miss Pussy, as everybody called her, and it became so ingrained in you that whatever her name might have been that you may have heard somewhere along the line, you don't even know what it is. And I had to call a cousin of mine who lives in the US, and she happened to live with my aunt, who celebrated her 104th birthday on Christmas Day, on the 25th of December, right? So she was able to tell me what my grandmother's actual name was, you know?
Yeah.
And so I would like to do some tracing there, because the Welsh family of Gore and the Lee family of Gore, I would like to do some tracing along that line. And speaking about tracing, we have many sites, many streets, you know, many places that's named after people. I mean, the main street in Guelph is called Depredin Street. Nobody knows who's Mr. Depredin, right? The other street...
Well, we do know who he is.
Well, but we don't have that information.
Yes,
you know,
we do know who he is.
The other street at the back of it is called Edward Street.
Right.
How did that street get its name? And the thing about it is, when you travel, when you go overseas, you find locations that have a particular name, and you can get the record as to how did that place get its name, you know, after whom it was named, what's the history of that person, and so on and so forth. And we live here and we go elsewhere, and in some instances we pay money to go to see these things and so, not realizing that we have an asset here because we're talking about tourism.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is the story that we are going to tell to these people when they get here? So the work that you're doing is critical in assisting us to be able to tell the story, because the people who are coming, they come for a particular experience. And if, as Angus said, the information as exists with the Leapers Hill, the information that we're giving is not authentic. And we have to be able to find a way to authenticate, you know, these things. And going forward, can we expect, coming from your society, some publications or, you know, some kind of facility where you can go and in one sitting have access to certain types of information?
I see that happening in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
With all things, of course, there's a cost associated with that.
There's a cost to everything. Everything has a cost.
Right. Like, for example, I mean, you're hosting the Zoom meeting. It's not free. There's an associated cost. And it's the same thing. We've done these live streams. We are basically paying out of pocket. At some point, we have to go to the members and say, are you guys going to contribute financially so that we can continue to move forward and offer you guys more things, more live streams. We've talked about creating content as far as how you research, because a lot of people just don't know how to actually do online research. I had a member who gave me 3 names and said that's all she knows. Within an hour, I had her whole family history because it involved a court case in England. But a lot of times that's the problem. As Steve was saying, we don't have access to what Europeans have because we are dealing with a enslaved, taken from African ancestry, which basically just chopped once we got here. But yes, to answer your question, we do see things in the future in terms of being able to offer people, whether it's printed on demand or just doing it online, creating an actual website as opposed to a Facebook platform. But yeah, we have things in the works for the future that hopefully we will create a legacy.
Yeah.
And it will be of importance to the younger generation, because honestly, the older generation, people my age, Angus' age, Steve's age, we're on our way out, and if we can't get these young people to recognize what they have in Grenada, then it will just be gone forever on top of what's already gone.
And just maybe to echo that, Philip, I think it's a matter of not even where people don't even realise how to search online. Even if they do, it's then having the time. And there's such a wealth of information that if they knew where exactly things were, they could do it in, I don't know, a fraction of the time it would take than if you're originally trying to do things for the first time. So, yeah, there's a lot that we can offer, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, I can see putting out a book, how to do Grenada genealogy.
Right.
Because I think with just three of us, plus we have some really other good people on the site as well, that regularly contribute and support and, stuff like that. So it's getting those people together and creating something and saying, here is what we have learned in the process of doing our research that we could share with you. I think that's something that we could probably look into at some point, On my thing, I write history, and I'm getting ready to publish the A to Z of Grenada Heritage second edition. There's a first edition out. It's been many years, but I'm hopefully within the next few months we'll have a new, and that gives you a broad outline of Grenada's history and lots of references in the back, tell you where to find different things. But that's more on the culture. It is on some of the people who've played, primary roles in our politics and things like that. But it's a little bit about the folklore, and, just a little bit of everything. I describe it as the book I wish I had when I was growing up in Grenada, And I think it's a good thing for people in the diaspora as well to share with their children who don't often get to go to Grenada, but still can experience some of the culture and things like that.
So in that vein, you referenced Leapers Hill earlier on. Mm-hmm. And seeing as you just mentioned that book, because I was going to come to that.
Right.
Do you have in the listings of those significant historical sites?
Yes.
And other natural assets.
Yes. Yes. It goes deeper, even not just about sites, but about buildings sometimes.
Okay.
York House. Okay. Or some other building in some part of the island, a specific plantation like Belmont Estate in St. Patrick, or Hermitage, So I do look at things that are a bit prominent, for example, mentioning slave pens, but actually saying that they were not slave pens, even though people say they are, but if you look at the research, you're like, I'm sorry, but that's incorrect. I totally understand why it was deemed that way. Okay. So things like that. So I look at important people or people we would deem important, and sometimes I'm trying to be a little more inclusive sometimes and putting in people who we probably would not find in an official gazette kind of thing, like people who were involved, like a lady who was involved in a spiritual Baptist church, and was instrumental in that movement. So I try, Norman Paul and other people like that. So I try to be as inclusive as possible in bringing in a good array of the history and culture, not just the St. George's focus, but also Carriacou, even Petit Martinique as well. Because I want every Grenadian to pick this up and figure out, and it's like, oh, all of this stuff is connected to my landscape, the place I grew up. So I think just, some of its street names, and granted, there will be a greater emphasis on places like St. George's and things like that, but I do try to include, all of the parishes. We have maps of all of the parishes and things like that in the book, So.
Can you just share a little more, because I've heard that issue being raised before about the slave pen not actually being slave pens.
Right.
When you say that, what do you mean? What is meant by that? Because generally speaking, the perception is, and the story has been, that these are the slave pens, and people do tours and go there, and it's being presented as that's the slave pen. I mean, can you?
Yeah, it is promoted. It is promoted by the Tourism Authority. It is promoted by the Tourism Authority.
Yes.
What I did actually, I have a blog post that's supposed to be coming out, if I would only finish it, that is looking at the slave pens. And basically, The premise is it looks at these structures. We have 3 of them. They've identified, 3 have been identified in the popular culture. Hermitage, Monkridge, those 2 plantations, and then on Melville Street, near to the police barracks.
Right.
So those are the 3 that have been identified. The 2 on the plantations, what I think is the reason they were identified is that you go under a plantation today, you go to River Antoine, you go to Belmont, or any other plantation, and there is nothing that reminds you of slavery. You might see the big house, or the estate house where whoever lived. You'll see the machinery, you'll see the crops, but there's nothing that reminds that slavery happened there. It's like it didn't exist.
Right.
So what I think happened is that in going to these 2 places, people found the darkest areas. They looked at these structures and they're like, well, those are pretty dark and we know slavery was bad. So something bad must have happened here. And it's interesting, both of those structures on Monkridge and in Hermitage are pretty close to the kitchen. They were used as storerooms as part of the kitchen. And I actually think I can go one step further and say there were very specific types of storerooms to store ice when we didn't have electricity. And this would have been the late 1800s, early 1900s, if you look at the structures of them.
Yeah, I've seen those structures. I've done visits, and along with tourism authorities and so, and people who are supposed to know.
Right.
And that is the narrative that you get in relation to these structures.
Well, I think that's the problem, and nobody does the research. Because even when I asked Philip, I was like, hey, could you see if you see anything on ice stuff in Grenada? And if you look through the old newspapers, I found an advertisement. This guy was selling ice at the corner of Melville and St. John Street. That's where that place was. That's where he was selling his ice out of. And I think people, ice. Where would this ice come from? It was ice that came all the way from North America, from Boston and those places. Yeah. These big, massive blocks of ice would come down and off of these boats, and they would be well packed, and then the ice would be distributed to the agent in the islands. And then actually it was an advertisement I saw by the government. They were looking for who could supply that ice for the hospital and for other places. So you had some of these estates that had money, and they had their little ice houses on the property. And they would buy this ice and get it transported there so they could have some nice drinks, maybe make ice cream, kind of stuff. I'm not quite sure what they used it for, But yeah, but again, it has taken me a lot of research to do this. If I didn't have access to Grenadian newspapers, which most people don't have, I wouldn't have been able to find these advertisements, So, and, the idea of that, I learned about the ice houses from a friend who's from Scotland. And he was visiting, we went to visit one of these, and he's like, oh, that reminds me just of the stuff we have in Scotland that are ice houses. So that got me thinking along those lines. Otherwise, it would have been hard for me to just come up with this. So I was able to get that, and once I started doing the research, you realize, and like I said, I totally understand why people want to find, it's like finding how, Grenada had tens of thousands of enslaved people, but the landscape shows nothing of it.
I think part of that, though, is if you actually look at the structure of what slave housing was, these weren't structures that were built to last.
Right.
They would have been blown over by hurricanes, just rotted away with time, because these things were made out of natural material.
Right.
We're not talking about bricks and galvanized or any of that. So,
as opposed to these structures.
Right, exactly. And just, building off of what Angus told me, I was like, let me actually do some research on this ice thing. And there's a wealth of information about the Ice King, who was out of Boston, and he failed a few times before he got it right. The ice would melt before he got to Martinique. That was his first venture, was getting ice from Boston to Martinique. And then he expanded. He sold ice in China, in India, all over the planet. So yeah, Grenada got ice as well, and it had to go somewhere. And those structures really do look like ice houses or some type of storage. Why would slaves live in a place like that? It makes no sense.
Well, this, like I said, this would be for punishment, but it was like, despite what slavery was, you know, the idea was to not kill your slave, but to keep your slave alive. You know, and there were some really bad, there were some severe punishments. There was severe punishment. You know, another example of this is, have you been inside of the Grenadian Museum, where you see those little things in the back and they said those were used for cells in a prison? That's incorrect.
Okay.
Those are just architectural features. The prison was actually in the drill yard. And luckily, I could say that with all the confidence because we actually have a plan of the prison in the drill yard.
Okay.
So I can tell you, and when you look at the structure, you look at the space and you're like, the British were bad, but they weren't that bad. You know, to put people locked up in that small space. That's totally not true. But it occurred that way to someone, and they're like, okay. You know, so you see, we do need, and it comes out like we need the archives, because I got that map of the prison from the British Archives, the National Archives. You could go there and order a copy. It cost me a few pounds, but that's the kind of research we need to look at this stuff. Otherwise, you'll just be saying whatever you want. You'll be just, anybody could come up with any story. And granted, sometimes the stories are good. One story that somebody overheard, a tourist guide, telling some tourists in St. George's, they asked about Sendell Tunnel, and they said, how did Sendell Tunnel got its name? Because they send all the slaves through. You know, and sometimes when I was in the museum, you would hear these guys come in and talk, and their stories, you just don't want to laugh because it's so sad. Because the tourist probably knows more about this stuff than they do, because they might buy a book and read about stuff. So you come in here now, and these guys are giving you these stories, and they could tell, those guys are good, they could tell a good story. So hopefully we could give them the correct information, you know, and train them to deliver that information, or that better information, and we don't have this where people are just throwing stories all over the place. Because you could walk through St. George's and you would hear all kinds of stories, you know. I'm working with Sulin the artist, Lowe's. We're looking at York House. And we're finding out the story on York House is totally incorrect. We're not quite sure why, but we're totally finding new information that changes the way that, you know, when the building was, who owned it, and all that kind of stuff. You know, and how the structure was built, that this was a building that actually grew. It wasn't as it is from all the way back in the 1700s, which kinds of is understandable. You know, but if you don't go, like I said, we're using all those newspaper stuff. You know, we use the newspaper archives, and we show, and you look at it, and you're like, oh, they were repairing. Oh, that's when they added that gallery at the front, because they were asking for somebody to do it. You know, so you see all these little pieces of things, and now you look at the structure in a very different light. You know, even though we're probably going to tear it down pretty soon, but you know, but I think there is a lot of research that needs to be done on so many things about Grenada. You know.
Steve, you're going to say something?
No, I was. I find myself, the three of us talk on a regular basis, but I find myself like today, learning so much from Angus as we speak. This is something new for me. I've not heard this before. I'm fascinated.
Sure, the information that's coming here, you know, and what's coming to mind really is that we set tourism is so, you know, is so important, you know, has such an important role in our economic agenda, right? And that it's critical that we get the stories, that we get the information, and so straight, so that when we have those visitors, we're building billion-dollar facilities, in this country, in the north and in the south. Okay? And then we have other projects going on elsewhere. So we intend, according to what the plan is, we intend to be having guests coming to Grenada. What are we going to say to them? What are we going to offer them in spite, apart from, you have a wonderful facility and so on. But, what are we going to offer them on the other hand?
I think it's a good point, because I think this is a revenue stream, isn't it? If there was a genuine tour that really explored our history and our culture, then there'll be certain tourists who just want to lay on the beach, and that's fantastic. But there'll be others who are a little bit inquisitive and really want to learn something new. And to be honest, people like myself, who I didn't grow up in Grenada, I lap it up, I'm sure there's lots of other people who are in my sort of position, born and raised in the UK with Grenadian heritage, or anywhere outside of Grenada, but with that heritage. We'd love to have that information, as I'm sure people who are born and bred in Grenada might also want to have that too. So I think this is a clear revenue stream. So it's rather frustrating we don't have it now.
I think because we don't have a thought out plan. It's just an haphazard. It's just what happens. We've been doing a certain thing a certain way. We just keep doing it. And it's worked because it's working. Something's working. So I think it takes a big step to get to the next level where you actually say, we need to do research. For example, take a place like Grand Mall. Everybody see it as a translation of Spanish, big bad. And people have said that it was because of people died there, it was a big cholera epidemic, all of that kind of stuff. But we now know, because we saw it in a book, in a manuscript that was written in the 1650s, that basically it was the French caught a big turtle there, a male turtle. Okay. And that's how the place got named. You wouldn't have known that any other way. There's no way you could make that up. You can't even find, and if you look on old maps, the M-A-L is actually spelled differently, because the French, Old French, was M-A-S-L-E, and that would have told you that it's male. Right. As opposed to, so one of the things I study are place names, trying to figure out who's Spanish, who's French, who is, and you notice, I think I ran into Samaritan recently, was one that I have it on a map and said that's a British name, because if you look at the spelling, but actually it derives from the French spelling, La Samaritaine. Had I not found that document, I would not have been able to do that. Montrich is another one. Montrich used to be R-I-C-H-E. So there are lots of these all over the place that if you don't do the research, you're going to just have a story. And granted, I love a good story. I love a good story, but you got to tell people that's a story.
Yeah.
Speaking of place names, just to bring it closer to home for me, like Guelph, for example, at one time it was Charlottetown, one time it was Duncantown, and it's gone through these different namings. Of course, Guelph ultimately stuck, but the reason it was called Duncantown at one point is because there were so many Duncans in Guelph that it became Duncantown, and then the British, obviously, who want to change everything, because they just hated the French, decided to call it Charlottetown. But Guelph ultimately stuck. So yeah, things go through changes. Right. And if you don't have any type of context for the story, you just won't know.
Right. I think
like Annandale, for example. Angus gave me a good education about Annandale, which I think most people in Grenada just accept to be as the story, but it's not the story at all. And I think we lack, I think the other thing that we lack is actually proper historical text. What I mean by that is that I think what has been done was good for what it is, in terms of the books that have been written, but these books are missing so much of the story. And yes, of course, things have to be edited due to, constraints as far as publishing. But why is it taking so long to get a new book after like Beverly Steele or before her, Divas? And some of these works have incorrect information as well. So we just continue to regurgitate old stories that oftentimes are just straight up, just made up.
Yeah. No, I think, and that's, my biggest push would be for a national archives. I've been trying to push since the 90s. Actually, when I was doing my master's degree in history, I wrote a plan for a national archives in Grenada, how we could combine like the registry, the health, where they give out your birth certificates, all of that, has that as one agency, a dispensing government agency for all these documents, and things like pass legislation that creates a records management program. If we don't manage our records, there's no way we're going to have an archives. Determining which documents go from usage to non-usage after what period of time. You need to determine all of that. So you definitely have to come up with a plan, pass the necessary legislation to do that. Otherwise, it's going to be at whose ever whim. Somebody's going to be like, you know what? When I was in the museum, all of the plans from the Ministry of Works got dumped in there, and rain was coming up wet, and we ended up throwing away a lot of them. And then they eventually came. I heard they were looking for like the plans for the stadium, things like that. They couldn't find them because they never. Yeah, because we don't have a good history of protected records, because I guess we never saw the need for them. But if you're going to write about your history and write about it in an authentic way, and granted, we have issues with documents. They were biased and, and things like that. We could still deal with that. We know they were biased because we know who they were written by and things like that. That's not an issue. The fact is we want to at least have something that we can work with, because they are factual information. It doesn't matter who writes it. It's correct. It happened, so we would know the day that people jump off Leapers Hill, or fell off or pushed off or whatever the case may be. We know what that date would be because somebody said this happened then. They may give you a distorted account of what happened, but at least you know what date it happened.
What date it happened.
So I think we can establish certain basic, factual data from any kind of document, even biased ones. And I say, what the bias is, who the people are that are being biased and the people they're biased against, so you're able to deal with that in your discussion of that information.
Okay. Speaking of Leapers Hill, just as a side note, talking towards the Aboriginal people of Grenada, I mean, we have all these grave sites which are with bones just sticking out of the ground. And
so they're getting washed into the sea.
Yeah.
You see,
I mean, it's horrible. It really is horrible. Even in Carriacou, from illegal sand mining, people's whole tomb just washed right out into the sea. It's disgusting. And nobody at a government level thinks that something needs to be done. Or if they do think it, they're not telling the public about it, because I don't know anything of any type of effort to do anything to save those.
Well, they have banned sand mining. They do specific beaches and stuff, specific areas that are designated, and anything beyond that, it's illegal for anyone to go take a bucket of sand.
Yes, we do know that, yes.
But you have to police it. Telling people that it's wrong is the first step. The same thing we have Pearl's Amerindian site. Anybody could go there and dig stuff. But nobody's ever prosecuted. Nobody has ever been prosecuted. I remember a politician said that, those are just fakes, so don't worry about it, kind of thing, which is not true. Those are being sold on eBay and places like that. That is Grenada's heritage that's being sold outside of. So no, there are lots of issues. And granted, I do understand that we have pressing issues. I totally get that. We have a health crisis. We have an economic crisis. Those are definite issues that we need to recognize. They take precedence. But even in the good years, we've never even looked in on some of these other issues because we never thought them important enough. And I think the time is going to become when we do want to go look for this stuff it's going to be gone.
And it's going to be gone, yes, because
You know.
we seem to be sacrificing our patrimony on the
Yes.
altar of development.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
and that's a
And-
big issue.
Yeah, we seem to be sacrificing our patrimony on the altar of development in the name of providing jobs. You know,
Yeah.
and
We have to
and
be really careful.
that is creating a serious dilemma for us. Could you imagine? It's coming up towards 4 o'clock already. You know.
Wow.
It's almost 4 o'clock. I don't know. So you said that the Grenada Genealogical and Historical Society Online has been around for how long? About 1 year.
Yes, that is
Right.
correct.
So let's say we are in 2021. What do what's your forecast for this entity, say in the next 3 years or so as we close? What do and what do you hope to accomplish? Where do you hope to take us? And how do you see that fitting into the overall development agenda of Grenada? I mean, we've touched a lot about that, but if you can just put it in a nutshell as we close.
In a nutshell, what I would like to see happen over the next few years and starting in 2021 is to actually, as we continue to grow the membership, is to actually present a petition to the government of Grenada that we have all these signatures from all over the diaspora, as well as within Grenada, with people like yourself who want to see the archives reopen in a building that is accessible to everybody. That is what I would ultimately like to see happen. That's the reason why I started the group, because I want these archives to be made available to people online. I want it to be available that you can go there in person in Grenada and actually look at these things, whether it's digitized copies. We need to raise the level of education about Grenada's history, which is wrapped up in these archives, and we need actual people who do preservation, because as Angus pointed out, as soon as you open these books up, they're falling apart. There's people who are specialists who actually know how to stop that from happening. There's all kinds of new technology where you can even scan a book, where you don't even have to open the book. So, yes, Grenada has a lot of pressing issues. I have family members in Grenada that have told me, why are you wasting your time on this? Because we have people who are starving in Grenada. I don't even know how you starve in Grenada when you can go steal a banana, plug a, whatever.
Don't go there, Philip.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be starving at least.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I think on that point, timing is actually pretty good, because as we have the digitization project going, it's got to lead to something. And if we're talking about 2 or 3 years' time for our site, and maybe raising a petition and getting that awareness, it'd be perfect timing. You've got the digitized records. Now let's build this archive. Let's do this properly. We've got all the resources together now. Let's channel it and make it happen, make it work for everybody.
Right. Yeah. Right now I have about 100 boxes of books and papers that have been collected by a lady who spent about 30 years putting together Grenada Revolution archives. I am trying to get it to go to Grenada. I need to start asking people to help me, because I'm paying per month to keep them in storage. So I need to get them to Grenada, because I really believe that this archive should be in Grenada. If people want to go see it, they go to Grenada. We have to stop exporting our preservation of our history and culture. So I think one of the problems I had when I was at the museum, people would come in and ask, well, what do you guys got in the Revel? We really didn't have anything. The one thing that people know us by, and we can't even come up with a good exhibition. We can't even come up with documents or books or whatever the case is. And I know there's some issues with it, but it's part of our history. No matter what we think of it, it is still part of our history.
It's part of the history.
Right. So we do need, and for the people who are interested, maybe not everybody is at this time, but for those who are interested, we should have this available. People should be able to explore,
But there are people who are interested. Let me tell you an experience that I had. I went to NULO, right? The New Life organization at Palm East, right?
Right.
And I went there, it was coming up to March 13th, and I went there to do a presentation to the young people there on the revolution. I was asked to come there to do that. And you know, I had to go back a following day because they became so engrossed in the story, right? Because many of the young people have not heard the story of the revolution, right? And typically, once you're telling a story of the revolution, you must start with the Gary dispensation. You must start with the coming of Gary, because the two are connected and interrelated, right? So you have to go back to tell what the conditions were during, you know, prior to the coming of Gary, and the role that he played in helping to transform the lives of these people that made them so loyal to him, you know, and the changing elements that came, you know, coming after the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement and all of that, and how it would have impacted on the politics of the day, and so on, with the return of Morris and that kind of thing, you know. So, and I'm telling you, they want to know. The young people want to know, and the visitors want to know. They want to know the story of this place. I remember I was involved with you, Angus. You would know George Vincent very well, I expect.
Yes.
Yeah?
My cousin, actually. My cousin.
Is your relative, okay. As you know, he is the one who came with the concept for the Goldfish Friday Festival.
Right.
Now, I worked with him and Judy Williams, Gren Coda, in putting this thing together. I was the first face and the first voice of the Goldfish Friday Festival.
Okay.
He came with the concept. But when Fish Friday was still a concept, at that time, Lou Smith was doing To the Point program on GBN. I was on To the Point program with GBN with Lou Smith, fielding questions from the public about Fish Friday.
Right.
And it was still just a concept. But George came with the concept and he sold it, right? So much so that I was able to go there and speak about it, and the thing had not been implemented as yet.
Right.
And when it was rolled out, I mean, it was the thing. You had people, the first real set of clients Fish Friday used to have wasn't Guelph people, you know. They used to be coming from Lansapine and them areas, and them, so these were the first real clients that Fish Friday had. These were the people coming to Fish Friday. And I say all of that to say that we try to take it a step further in terms of creating a tour for visitors coming to St. John's. So they would start at the falls in Concord, and from there they would visit the Douglaston estate, right? Toby had the spice operation going on there, and so on. And then they would go to the Nutmeg Pool, as we call it, right? And then the intention was to take them up to that fort. There is an old fort up at the top of the St. Rose Convent up there, right? And so on. And we had conversations with Huggins Toes, Mr. Laddie Duncan, right? We had conversation with him, and he came and they visited the site and so on, and they were ready to start bringing tours there. But it came down to who owns the fort, and the fort is supposed to belong to the nuns, and they were not willing to give permission and all of that, and so that just put paid to that. But there is so much of a story there with the two estates. You have the ridge running here, you have Douglaston on one side, you have Gov Estate on the other side, and there is that entire story because all of the people, the Gov people, the Tong people, actually came from these areas to, you know, to settle. And I mean, the
Pharaoh's Rebellion had a big thing in Guam. Guam was a big center for that. Yeah.
Right. And there is that house right next to the police station in Guam with that Victorian design and so on. Right. It was done for destruction and for already, because one of the investors had bought that place and it was going to be destroyed, but efforts were made to really save it. You know, there is a good idea for it, making it some kind of museum and so on, because it, you know, that site in itself, that building has particular history related to it, you know. And so there's so much around all of this that can enhance our tourism products.
It needs a plan. It needs a plan. It's not just, I think when we do plans, we have these big grandiose things, but we need to look at some of the simple things that you could do on the ground that benefit local communities. Not just these, you know, big groups, buses all over. You just want the people in the area need to benefit. I think we've had that where the tourism authority may utilize the island's culture, but the benefits are not getting back to communities.
Okay.
You know, and I think we need to make sure that this thing, that people in the rural areas benefit, you know, by actually participating in that tourism stuff. And I know there are attempts that have been made to do some of that, but we need to do a better job of that. You know, if you're going to utilize all the jab and shortney people and stuff from the countryside, they need to get more benefits. It's just, that's just how it works. You know, so I think if we set up these things and we come up with better plans, you know, and when you do plan, you include people in those areas. You know, you do have to include, you can't just, you know, we always accuse, you know, it's a St. George's country thing. You know, we need to move beyond stuff like that and recognize that you have to be a part, bring those people in, you know, so they can tell you how it is their communities work and how they would like to see it change.
Okay. Well, probably with the kind of work that people like you are doing and networking with other people locally, we can begin to develop more localized, you know, products, you know, community tourism products that can be of interest to visitors and begin to cause that income generating capacity for the rural communities and so. So any final words from you gentlemen as we close? I mean, it was really a pleasure having you, and I'm happy that you accepted my invitation. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to become a member of
thank you. We want to thank you as well.
Yes, thank you.
You know, I hope the viewers have learned something today, and I hope that you being there in Grenada, you could be a voice for us on the ground.
Definitely. So do you have any particular events coming up in the short time? I know that you have had different people, you know, doing different things. Someone did a book and there was, you know, I know you've had different people doing different things. Anything in the pipeline within the coming weeks and so?
Yes. There's one coming up the end of the month, actually.
31st, yeah. That's going to be specific, using DNA to trace your ancestry.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So that's because people have asked for that, so we're trying to respond. Probably the one after that, we're going to do talking more specifics about how you actually do some of the research in the documents as well. Okay. You know, so, and so any kind of thing. I would just like to say, you know, thanks for having us on, having this forum, you know, to talk about some of the things that we're doing, and you know, I really think that we are at a stage where people want to find out more about their identity and their connections to this tiny little island that we all love, you know, and I think it really would be cool if we can have a place, and it's like, you know, like I said, I want to reiterate, we are aware that there are multiple things going on that the government is dealing with, but sometimes if you make it okay for other people to come in and work, you know, all of these guys here would like, yeah, we'll contribute. You know, we'll even go out and raise money, but we need to know that something is there on the ground that's going to be there. You know, if you pass the necessary legislation, we can work with that. We have the case of the museum where legislation was passed, and now the museum is getting ready to move to a next level. You know, so we need these kind of things. Government, there's lots government can do, you know, to help promote some of this stuff. And, you know, we want to work with them, you know, because they may not, we know they can't do everything. And I think we sometimes depend on them too much, you know, but sometimes make it easier for others to come and help, you know, to get some of this stuff going and play a role in advancing, you know, some of these things that would get neglected. So.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'd like to echo what the others have said in terms of thanking you, Raphael, for giving us this chance to come and speak with you today on the comfort zone. I think one of the things that has been I'm very mindful of is that Grenada's a relatively small place, but look where we Grenadians are. We're all around the world. You know, we have big numbers in America, we have big numbers in Britain, we have big numbers outside of Grenada. Looking at the sites alone, we're drawing people from many places around the world, all with a shared interest in the history. Programs like this are great for generating that awareness, and we'll continue to do what we can do as well. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah. Mr. Don?
No, they said it all.
They said it all.
I'm thankful. I'm thankful that you had us on your show today. I'm happy that you're part of our group on Facebook. And like I said, we need people in Grenada to work with us, to help us. We can make things happen from, quote unquote, the first world. This is where the money is raised. It's raised in the US, it's raised in England, in the UK. And we need to know, if we raise this money and send it to Grenada, that it's actually going to be used for its intended purpose. And that's what I want to continue to do, just continue to get people involved. There's a lot of people that genuinely want to make a change. And if we can help facilitate them to make their voice heard, so be it. And hopefully it will make a change on the ground in Grenada, that we can have our archives, an actual place where people can go, and the tourism dollars will help people travel to Scotland and England and wherever to go do genealogy research. We could have the same thing in Grenada. As Steve said, I mean, we probably have more Grenadians living outside of Grenada than in Grenada. So that's a market in and of itself. Forget about people who just want to come to Grenada. And one thing that I think, just to conclude my 2 cents, is that I do believe that all these outside entities that are building things in Grenada, what Grenada, if I was in charge, okay, my opinion, for whatever it's worth, they would have to contribute towards the archives. They would have to put in, if they're doing a multi-million-dollar project, you know, put in 10 grand into being in Grenada, using our land in Grenada to develop your project, which is going to make you money. Give back to Grenada. It's not just about jobs. Yeah, people need jobs. We understand that. But Grenada needs to save its history. And it's not going to happen from within Grenada by itself, based on what we know. And that's it.
All right. Well, thank you again, gentlemen. You know, I'm Brother John.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So before we close, you know, what's your take on? Because I know that you're somebody who have a deep interest in that kind of thing. That's why you're facilitating us, and that's why you're facilitating that conversation here this afternoon.
You know, I was just listening.
You know, what's your take?
It was very, very interesting. I was interested in terms of talking about the names of places and what and why this was called this way and so on. Like you mentioned, you was part of the whole makeup of the Fish Friday.
Fish Friday, yeah.
You know, and people don't know where it came from. Well, probably you might have heard of Rainbow City, right?
Yeah.
I was the first person who gave it the name Rainbow City. A friend of mine, Jim, was a white brother who came to Grenada. He was a designer, architectural person. He was working with Koyaba hotels and all the little businesses in Grenada. I had a furniture shop in Grenville, and he was giving me some of the contracts to because I had a working shop, to produce some of the things that he designed. Like for instance, Xerox and in St. George's to recreate the desks, sitting the shelves and stuff like that. Koyaba Hotel. And one evening I was going home. He lived not too far away from where I was living. And he said, "John, I want to show you something." So I walked inside his house, and he had this big map of the town of Grenville. And then a picture up on the wall, and all the city, like the front, looking from outside into Grenville, a rainbow. The town was painted in a rainbow color. So I walked in and I said, "That's a Rainbow City." You know, he said, "That's the name." you know, and he looking for. So we started talking about how we could do something in Grenville, have an exhibition, a cultural exhibition on a particular day. So I said, yeah, we could do that. We'll call it Rainbow City and stuff like that. So I started in for a while. We talked about it, what could be done. And then I was on the CDC at the time. Peter Blair was the chairman. So I spoke to Peter Blair. I said, Peter Blair, look, I want you to come and see this. How we could fix this, how we could get this into the culture in the carnival season or somewhere around it. And we happened to bring it into the bigger part of the organization, and they adopted it. I said, yes, we could go with it. And we had our first exhibition, Rainbow City exhibition, in Grenville, right? That weekend before Carnival. So Rainbow City started off in a little house in Paradise, right, the Aberdeen's house, and evolved into a big festival today, right? And Jim had a big plan for Grenville. Even the Telescope Beach, he was talking about kind of backing the sea up, so because Telescope was eroding, so how we could have nice little shops on the beach, you know, and make it a real nice tourist attraction. So all of these plans was there to create a boardwalk in the car park, going around with the bus terminal is in Grenville, kind of make the place look nice, you know. Unfortunately, you know, Jim, they didn't treat Jim very well in the official launching of the thing. But the original drawings and the designs, he had that, you know. So those who do Rainbow, you know, just doing it out of an exhibition or culture show in the night. But the bigger picture they doesn't have. I have it and Jim had it. So the dreamers are not involved right now. So what's going on is just people doing a culture show, you know. The original intent is not being released to the people in the way it should be done. So I like the fact that the genealogy thing is something that I think we need to be done, have done. For me, tracing my grandparents' roots, you know, knowing more of my great-grandfather and stuff like that, and you hear stuff, but nobody really give you a clear direction of where to go search and where to find. So that would be a good thing for Grenada, Carriacou, and pretty Martinique, because I know there's a family in Carriacou, but I don't know where they are. The Callis family, everywhere. Something I found, I also believe to be true that not everybody that carry your last name is blood related, but more plantation related. You know? So I might be a Callis and a Negro Callis, but then an Indian or white person that is Callis. By plantation, not by blood, you know. So we have to find a connection, and probably do the DNA. You mentioned about DNA testing. Perhaps if you find out DNA testing, somebody who carry Philip have no connection bloodline with the Philip. It just be plantation related because he was on the same plantation, the same, you know, plantation owner. And after slavery, everybody go their own way. Nobody seems to check for their original origin. So we stuck with everybody being a Callis, everybody being a Fleming, everybody being such. But are we blood related? You know, and that's a biggie that we had to find out. Because you see people from Jamaica. Just before I go, my wife was sick and I was at the hospital, and I picked up a Charlotte magazine, and I was reading through it, and there was a story of a gentleman who was taken from St. Vincent a slave, and he was a Charles in St. Vincent. By the time he got to Martinique and was sold, he became a Francois, you know? And then, so you have a wife and children that was left behind St. Vincent. You get married again in Martinique, wife and children again, you know? And then they sold him to some other planter in Montreal. You understand? So he leave children in St. Vincent and then sent in Martinique, and they didn't have any family in Canada, Montreal to be exact. But then if you understand, there's a loss. There's a generation that is lost right there. So how do we connect the dots? And I see people making this blood connection and not really realizing it. They might find themselves saying, you know, I like this person, and this person really cool, I could relate to this person. And if you go check it out, really is a blood connection. Blood speaks, you know. And that is one thing we have to start doing, is documenting the DNA, you know, and connecting the dots with the plantation people. So Mr. Callis may have been the plantation owner, and everybody who left after slavery left with the last name. Where where you come from?
Actually, we did a show on last names and how a lot of Grenadians get their last name. We actually did a show on that.
Okay.
Yeah. So to tell you that there actually wasn't anybody named Calise who owned the plantation. Calise was actually a first name. It's actually from the French.
You see? There you go.
You know. And I think it's also connected to the place that's called Calise.
In St. George's.
As well. There was a person who was named Calise in that area that owned that property. So we're doing little by little, you know, and trying to put stuff out there, give people different ways of looking at their genealogy. But by looking at DNA as well, we had a scientist come on a few weeks ago talking about some of the work that she has done in the Caribbean, looking at different types of heritage based on DNA.